Are you nervous? My husband Michael asked, watching me fidget with my clothes in front of the mirror. I was adjusting my blouse for the 10th time and couldn't stop glancing at the clock. Yes, I am, I admitted honestly. Today was my first day at my new job, and I wanted everything to go perfectly. It was my first real job, and I was determined to make a good impression on my coworkers and bosses. I had been ready to leave on time, but Michael had offered to drive me to work, and now we were both in danger of being late. The reason for our delay was his mother, Patricia. She had shown up at our house before sunrise, crying and carrying her bags. She needed a place to stay and had offered to look after the kids while we worked. Since we didn't have much time to talk or sort things out, we quickly assured her she could make herself at home and hurried off to work, hoping everything would be fine. When we got home that evening, it became clear that giving Patricia free rein in our house might not have been the best decision. As soon as I walked through the door, I noticed something was off. My slippers were missing. After a quick search, I spotted them on Patricia's feet. She was strolling around the house, completely at ease, wearing my favorite bear-shaped slippers. These weren't just any slippers. They had been a gift from my late grandmother, and I treasured them deeply. I had always been careful with them and never let anyone else wear them. Seeing them on someone else's feet, no matter how much I cared for her, made my stomach sink. "Patricia," I began politely, "I thought I gave you the guest slippers earlier?" I was trying to hint, gently, that it might be time to return my cherished slippers. "Oh, Jessica, you did," she replied, completely calm. "But they were so cold. You young people don't feel the chill the way I do. My feet hurt so much, and your slippers are so soft and warm. You don't mind, do you? You can just wear the guest ones. It's not a big deal for you, is it?" Her words stung, but I forced a smile. It was a big deal for me. Those slippers held sentimental value, and I didn't want anyone else using them. But Patricia didn't know that, and I hadn't told her. Blaming myself for not speaking up earlier, I decided to let it go. As I tried to push the slippers out of my mind, something else caught my attention. "Where's the living room rug?" I asked, noticing the bare floor where our soft, fluffy carpet used to be. "Oh, that rug was making the floor too warm, so I rolled it up and put it away," Patricia said casually, as though rearranging the house was perfectly normal. I sighed, realizing this was just the beginning of her stay. It had been one chaotic day already, and I couldn't help but wonder what surprises tomorrow might bring. I looked around, puzzled. "Where's the rugs?" I asked. "Oh, I sent it to be cleaned," Patricia replied casually. "Forgive me, my dear, but it was covered in so much dust, as if it hadn't been cleaned in years. You really need to take better care of it, or you'll be breathing in all that dust later." I frowned. "But we bought it less than a month ago, and we clean it every day," I protested. Patricia shrugged, unimpressed by my response. "Well, draw your own conclusions, dear. It just means you should have done a more thorough job of cleaning it," she said with an air of superiority. I wanted to argue, but decided it wasn't worth it. I was too exhausted to start a debate. My first day at work had been both exciting and draining. All I wanted was a hot shower and to collapse into bed. As I trudged to the bedroom, hoping for a moment of peace, I heard Patricia's voice behind me. "Why are you lying down?" she demanded, barging into the room without knocking. "Who's going to cook supper?" I sat up, startled. "We already ate dinner at the restaurant," I explained, my tone a mix of fatigue and frustration. "I'm tired, Patricia. I just need to rest." Her eyebrows shot up in disbelief. "What kind of dinner is that? Restaurant meals are so tiny, and you can't even tell what they're cooking half the time. Come on, get up. Let's go to the kitchen and make something. Or have you decided to starve your mother-in-law and your husband?" I sighed, knowing there was no escaping her insistence. Reluctantly, I got out of bed and followed her to the kitchen. To my surprise, Michael was already there. Patricia must have pulled him into her plans before confronting me. He stood by the counter, peeling potatoes, his eyes occasionally drifting toward the television in the corner. The three of us worked together, though the atmosphere was anything but calm. Patricia took every opportunity to point out how things should be done her way, making both Michael and me feel like amateur chefs in our own home. Then, without warning, Patricia announced, "I've decided to stay for an indefinite period of time. I've had a big fight with my husband. So, to show him I'm serious, I've moved in with you and the kids. I won't leave until he apologizes." My heart sank. Knowing my father-in-law's stubborn nature, I realized this situation could drag on for weeks, or even longer. I felt tears prick the corners of my eyes as the weight of her words hit me. This wasn't going to be a short visit. It was the start of something much bigger. All I could do was brace myself for the chaos ahead. I came to the sinking realization that Patricia would be staying with us for a very, very long time. My gut feelings turned out to be correct. Weeks went by, and there was no sign of her leaving or even thinking about returning to her own home. To make matters worse, her husband, Michael's father, seemed to be enjoying his newfound freedom. He showed no interest in reuniting with Patricia, fully embracing the perks of bachelor life. Patricia, on the other hand, seemed to love her new living arrangements. She no longer had to wake up early to cook meals, manage household bills, or do laundry. Instead, she spent her days watching American dramas on television, only pausing to give us instructions about household chores she felt needed to be done. Tasks like cleaning the windows, reorganizing shelves, or even dusting areas that didn't need it became her way of keeping us busy. Michael was starting to reach his breaking point. He would occasionally glance at his mother with a look that was somewhere between frustration and desperation. At one point, he tried to talk to her about the situation. "Mom, don't you think it's time to go back home? This arrangement isn't working for anyone." But Patricia stood her ground, as stubborn as ever. "I told you already, Michael. I'll leave when your father apologizes." End of discussion. Michael and I finally decided to call his father to sort things out. After all, this was a problem only he could fix, or so we thought. When we reached him on the phone, his reaction was anything but helpful. "Are you two out of your minds?" Michael's father said, sounding almost amused. "For the first time in years, I feel alive and free. There's no way I'm taking her back. She's your mother, and now she's your responsibility. By the way, aren't you ashamed of bothering me with this nonsense?" Before we could say anything else, he hung up. Moments later, Michael's attempts to call him back were met with the cold reality of being blocked. His own father had cut off all communication, leaving us to deal with Patricia on our own. Michael was visibly upset. He threw his phone onto the couch in frustration, his face a mixture of disappointment and anger. "I can't believe this," he muttered. "I never thought my marriage would face something like this." I could feel my patience wearing thin, too. Patricia's constant presence in the house, her lack of contribution, and her controlling behavior were becoming unbearable. I had hinted to Michael several times that I was nearing my limit. After all, this was my apartment. Michael had lived with his parents before we got married, and he was still technically registered at their address. Now he understood that if my patience snapped, this situation might escalate in ways he didn't want to imagine. Something had to change, and soon, or the harmony in our home would be shattered entirely. I wouldn't hesitate to kick Michael and his mother out if things didn't improve. But my mother-in-law, Patricia, seemed completely unconcerned about pushing boundaries or upsetting us. Michael realized this too, after a month of her living with us. One evening, we had just returned home from work and were still in the hallway when Patricia walked out of the guest room. Without a word, she approached the dresser, opened it, and pulled out my wallet. My eyes widened in shock as I watched her open it and take out all the cash.
"Mom,
"What do you think you're doing?" "That's my wallet," I exclaimed, unable to contain my anger. She didn't even flinch. "I know it is," she replied, casually flipping through the bills. "Why is there so little money in here?" I was stunned by her audacity. "That's my first salary. Put it back this instant," I demanded. Instead of apologizing, Patricia tucked the cash into her bra and adjusted it, as if daring me to say more. "This is my money," she declared confidently. "And what's the big deal? In our family, we share everything, including money. You should have known this when you married into the family," she added, wagging her finger at me like I was the one in the wrong. I was boiling with rage. "Oh, I'll show you what sharing means," I snapped, storming off. I locked myself in the bathroom to calm down, refusing to join anyone for dinner. When I came out, I went straight to bed without speaking to Michael. By morning, I had a plan. It was time to remind Patricia that she was a guest in our home and that Michael and I had our own family and rules. If she wanted to stay, she needed to respect that. I woke up at dawn to execute my plan. As quietly as I could, I made a few changes around the house. When Michael got up and went into the bathroom, his loud laughter almost ruined everything. "Keep it down," I hissed. "You'll blow my cover." The first part of my plan was subtle, but symbolic. I rearranged the living room to reflect how I wanted things to look. Patricia had been rearranging furniture and decorations to suit her tastes. Then, I took all my personal belongings, including things like my favorite slippers and keepsakes, and locked them away in a cabinet where she couldn't access them. Finally, I removed the guest towels and any extras she might use without asking. It wasn't about being petty, it was about setting boundaries. If she wanted to treat our home as her own, she needed to understand that there were limits. As I watched Michael struggle to suppress his laughter, I couldn't help but smile. This was just the beginning. If Patricia thought she could walk all over us, she was about to learn otherwise. I snapped at Michael, annoyed by his inability to take things seriously, and went back to my task, focusing on the plan that had started forming in my mind. Meanwhile, Patricia seemed utterly unconcerned about anything outside her own comfort. She lay in bed, stretching luxuriously, clearly enjoying the luxurious mattress and soft pillows. It was far better than the bed she had back at her own home, and she wasn't about to give it up anytime soon. The morning was hers to savor. The kids were out working, so there was no rush to get up. She decided she would lie down for a bit longer, take her time with breakfast, and then indulge in another episode of her favorite American drama. Why not? Life was easy here. She didn't have to cook, clean, or pay a single bill. Eventually, she rose from bed, stretching like she had all the time in the world. She did a couple of light exercises, bends and squats, before strolling out of her room. She hummed softly as she made her way to the kitchen, expecting to find breakfast waiting for her. But when she stepped in, the sight before her made her freeze in place. Yellow stickers. Everywhere. The fridge, the microwave, the toaster, the cupboards, everything had a bright yellow sticker on it. Her brows furrowed in confusion as she looked around the room, taking in the bizarre sight. At the kitchen table, I sat casually, sipping juice from a glass. I didn't bother to look up as she stood there, visibly shocked. "Why aren't you at work?" Patricia finally asked, breaking the silence, her voice laced with irritation. "They've allowed me to work from home," I replied coolly, my tone calm and unbothered. Her attention returned to the stickers. She stepped closer to the fridge, grabbed one of the yellow notes with 3 fingers, and peeled it off. Slowly, she read what was written on it. Her face went from confusion to disbelief and then to anger as she processed what it said. "What the hell is this supposed to mean?" she exclaimed, waving the sticker in the air like it was a piece of evidence in a courtroom. I leaned back in my chair, stretching slightly, taking another sip of juice. "Oh, that's," I said, feigning nonchalance. "Those are the prices for services in this house." I sat down and calculated the cost of living here, the food, the utilities, and the use of space for the 3 of us. Me, Michael, and you. Patricia's jaw dropped. She blinked at me, clearly struggling to process my words. Finally, she sputtered, "Why is bread so expensive? Are you out of your mind? Charging your own mother for bread?" "Well, excuse me," I replied, shrugging. "You took my entire first salary without even asking. Food doesn't buy itself, and bills don't magically pay themselves either. Someone has to cover the costs." She stared at me in stunned silence before narrowing her eyes. "And does Michael know about this ridiculous stunt?" "Of course he does," I replied firmly. "In this family, we have a rule that everyone contributes to the household expenses. You've been living here for over a month now, so it's only fair that you pay your share. Michael is willing to take on some of your costs because you're his mother, but not all of them. You're an adult, and adults contribute." Patricia's face turned beet red. "The nerve you have," she shouted, her voice shaking with anger. "Charging your own mother-in-law. How dare you?" You've turned my son against me. I haven't turned anyone against you, I said, keeping my tone steady but assertive. You've been living here, as if this were a hotel. That's not how things work in this house. Michael and I work hard to maintain this household, and it's not fair for you to live here without contributing. Patricia stood there, shaking with rage, unable to respond. I could see she was grappling with the reality that her carefree days of lounging in our home were coming to an end. She had crossed too many boundaries, and it was time for her to understand that this wasn't her space to rule over as she pleased. For a moment, she looked like she might explode, but instead, she turned on her heel and stormed out of the kitchen, slamming the door to her room behind her. I leaned back in my chair, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and exhaustion. This wasn't the end of the battle, but it was a step towards setting boundaries and reclaiming my home. I will never set foot in your house again. You can shove your food where the sun doesn't shine, Patricia screamed, her face as red as a tomato. She furiously tried to rip another sticker off the coffee maker, but when she removed it, another one was waiting right underneath. Coffee, water, cream, electricity. Yes, everything is itemized and needs to be paid for separately, I said, my tone dripping with mock politeness. I flashed her my sweetest smile, which only seemed to make her angrier. Patricia let out a frustrated growl and stormed off to her room. For a moment, blissful silence filled the apartment. Then, her shrill voice echoed through the walls as she made a phone call. Hello, have you lost your wife or something? Because it sure seems like you have, she barked into her phone. Come and pick me up immediately, do you hear me?
Right now.
And God help you if you're even a minute late, she added, her tone sharp with fury. It seemed Patricia's husband, who had previously blocked her number, had either forgotten or unblocked her without realizing the consequences. Less than a minute later, she emerged from her room, fully dressed, her suitcase in hand. She stormed into the kitchen, threw some money on the table with dramatic flair, and glared at me. Here, take your precious money. I'll tell my son everything, you hear me? He doesn't need a wife like you scheming little creature, she snapped, venom dripping from her words. 20 minutes later, her husband arrived. His face was a mix of resignation and amusement as he helped her with her bags. Just as they were about to leave, he paused at the door and turned to me. How did you manage to pull this off? He asked, clearly impressed. I smiled, shrugging casually. Years of dealing with my siblings growing up. They taught me how to handle a stubborn personality, I said with a wink. He chuckled. Write me a guide, will you? I might need this for future reference, he joked before escorting Patricia out the door. As soon as it closed behind them, I let out a deep sigh of relief and called out loudly, Michael, where are you? From the bedroom, Michael appeared, almost crawling on all fours. Coming, dear, he said sheepishly, his face a mixture of guilt and admiration. You're incredible, Jessica. I wouldn't have even thought of doing that, he admitted. To be honest, I replied, the whole thing was a bit embarrassing. It went further than I wanted, but I just couldn't take it anymore. I love your mom, really, but not when she's living with us. Michael smiled and wrapped an arm around me.
Don't worry about it. She'll survive.
She's tough. She'll calm down, think it over, and maybe, just maybe, she'll come back to make amends one day, he reassured me. I hope so, I said, though part of me wasn't entirely sure. With a deep breath, I let the stress melt away. Then Michael and I burst into laughter, playfully shoving each other as we started peeling off the now unnecessary stickers from every surface in the house. Peace had returned, and we were determined to enjoy every moment of it.